And here we are with the one conundrum, one circle that you can never square in sport. When did it become all about money? When did it become all about money? I'm back. Welcome to One-2-One with Simon Jordan. After a well-earned sabbatical, I'm back from 2 weeks of sailing the 7 seas of Spain, or actually finding myself locked down with COVID for 9 days and only testing negative on my last day back. Fantastic. Anyway, great to be back. Don't forget to keep liking and subscribing and keep leaving your questions in the comment section below. But let's get to this week's show. Look, I mean, Eddie Howe has done a great job last year against the backdrop of people like me expecting him not to do the job that he did. He was given some support, they bought the right players, but he created the right culture. He embraced the sentiment of people being thoroughly disillusioned by 13 years of Mike Ashley's ownership and thoroughly enthused by a new opportunity. He caught that wave and turned it into a feeling of momentum and decent football and brought some good players in. Now, moving forward, Newcastle have got to go through the machinations of starting to harness the expectation of the football world, not just the Newcastle fans who cry every time you say about expectation. They have every right to have an expectation of their club like every other fan does. But now they've got this ridiculous amount of money behind them, and they're going to go after the baubles and the successes of the sides that have done it previously, Man City and so on and so forth, that have done it with a similar sort of version of ownership. Now, it is a long way away from Eddie Howe then being considered for an opportunity to manage the national side. Now, that being said, Gareth Southgate could really lay no claim for becoming the national team manager, as opposed to, or more to the point, only because he was within the confines of the FA did that job manifest itself for himself. I think that Eddie needs to focus, and I'm sure he will, on the opportunity that Newcastle exhibits. I think he's got a very interesting season ahead of him. You know, it's interesting to see that they're linked with players like James Maddison at Newcastle, because Leicester are the natural emulation, the natural step for Newcastle to be looking to overtake clubs like Leicester and build upon the successes and the achievements of clubs like Leicester that don't have their embarrassment of riches but do have significant levels of successes, Premier Leagues and FA Cups, to mention the 2 tournaments that they've won. I think that Eddie Howe is going to be a very decent manager for many years to come. Now, whether that culminates in him landing at the national team job, whether he wants it, whether he wants a part-time job. My main focus for Eddie, if I were the owners of Newcastle, would be trying to break into the top 10, the top 8, getting Newcastle stabilised with this enormous amount of change, and then seeing what it lays. You know, and I think that we should be not focused on Eddie Howe being an England manager and more focused on Gareth Southgate trying to bring a tournament to a successful conclusion, as the Lionesses have just proved can be done. Fulham's spending pattern 2 or 3 years ago was they bought the wrong players, spent all their money, or all the money that was being generated naturally from football rather than the owner, on a group of players that weren't good enough, broke up the dressing room that was successful the previous year and achieved very little. It's all about how you spend money. Now, Forest have bought Lingard, and we'll see how that works out. Obviously, I've made some observations about his salary. I'm not a Lingard fan, but we'll see if he does something for Nottingham Forest, and if he adds value, then he'll be well worth the signing that they've put in place for him. The players that they sign will define how much of a waste of money it is. Their key objective and their sole objective is to finish 4th and bottom in the Premier League. If they can achieve that and beyond, then Nottingham Forest will be back in the Premier League and now looking forward, and then they'll be moving on to second seasons. Steve Cooper is a good manager and has proven to be a good manager, and so were the guys that took Fulham up. So we will see if the money's been spent wisely, if the money leaves them in a situation where they've bought the wrong players rather than the right players for the uniqueness of their individual club. But what I am pleased about is that Nottingham Forest are back in the Premier League, and I do want them to be successful, because growing up in the late 70s, I saw that Nottingham Forest team come through. I saw the documentary that a colleague of ours at talkSPORT, Johnny Owen, produced called I Believe in Miracles, which shows you the brilliance of that team from the 70s. When you look at John Robertson, who was my favourite player that I grew up with as a kid, and you look at the people like Gary Birtles and Ian Bowyer and John McGovern and Larry Lloyd and Archie Gemmell and Viv Anderson and so on and so forth, and Frank Gray and all of these players that turned Nottingham Forest into this phenomenon of the 70s. So I don't know whether they've pooped the bed with the amount of money they spent on the wrong players or the right players, but I certainly hope that they make a really good contribution to the Premier League, and I expect them to do so. Well, I find these documentaries a bit like mockumentaries, these sporting ones, because you're not really seeing what goes on. We've seen the All or Nothings with Tottenham, and we've seen the Crystal Palace one, and we've seen other ones like Sunderland, which had amusement value because some of the characters behind the scenes. I have to confess that I'm not a huge lover of these sort of broadcasting ideals, because I think they're more for the platforms and the commercial venture than they are for the intrigue and for the information. No, I have no vested interest in Arsenal, so I have no real interest in watching a documentary about Arsenal. If I've ever watched a documentary that I've really liked, it's probably When We Were Kings, which is the Muhammad Ali story of when he fought George Foreman in the Rumble in the Jungle. So that was an insight into the sporting greatness and the backdrop of a legendary event. But these documentaries that are produced, that will probably end up with that ghastly Wagatha Christie outcome now being produced as some sort of sideshow as a dreadful case, are not for me. I don't find them particularly engaging, enlightening, illuminating, or call to action to view. But if others do, fill your boots. I think it's an inevitability that you have to accept a fox in the hen house, especially one that has the ridiculous amounts of money that the Saudis have and the ambition for this particular project. Will it stay? Can you continue to do a 54-hole tournaments and tour and shotgun starts? And is there some level of ingratitude that the golfers have towards the tours that built them the opportunity to be in a position? Probably. Does there need to be a meeting of the minds? Do the particular PGAs have a God-given right to maintain a monopoly over what golfers can and can't do? If you're going to stop golfers from playing in the Ryder Cup, isn't that sort of restriction of trade because they've chosen to play on another tour? I think the DP Tour will throw in with the PGA to try and find a solution to the financial side of things. And here we are with the one conundrum, one circle that you can never square in sport. When did it become all about money? When did it become all about money? When did it become a quantum of money that is already significant, has to be so much more significant in order to justify your participation in it? Would I compete in it? I don't know, it depends how I was at the time. If I was Tiger Woods and was at the level that I had achieved, both in the game and economically, probably I wouldn't. If I was a player that was struggling to compete and saw an opportunity, possibly I would. It all depends how you frame the question, and of course there's nuance and there's peculiarities and vagaries around what your choice would be at the time. Do I like it? Not particularly. Do I think that there needs to be a bit of a grown-up conversation and a Venn diagram of how this evolution of golf can be sort of not so much shoehorned but accommodated so there's an outcome that doesn't bring the civil war that currently exists in golf? It's one of those challenges. It's the globalization of sport. It's the reality of the world that we live in. Money drives everything. On one hand, you can't begrudge people for wanting to better themselves. On the other hand, the quantums of money are rewarding mediocrity. I'd like to think there's a solution that involves people being grown up, stepping back from the emotion of one set of people thinking you're taking away from us and we gave you your opportunity, and then the other argument, which is that we should be able to get what we want when we want, and somewhere in the middle there should be a solution, and I hope that the grown-ups in the room will find it. Eduardo, I make very little of McGregor versus Mayweather 2. I don't particularly enjoy that sort of nonsense. I think it's choreographed. I think it's like watching the wrestling from the 70s when you know what's going to happen next. I think Conor McGregor is of course been a leading light for his sport. His days have gone in that sport. So why we would think we'd be seeing the best of him in boxing. Mayweather, I find dull and repetitive and uncouth and unedifying, because whilst he is an outstanding boxer, and I watched him fight Ricky Hatton and school Ricky Hatton after a period of time in that fight, and I've seen him fight all the great fights, and there's no doubt that he is a phenomenal talent. I also think he's an ungracious individual. I didn't like his interview he did with Larry Merchant when he decided to attack him, who's a great broadcaster. I don't like it all being about money, and that's all we talk about. So I would probably rather pull a hair out of my backside than watch Conor McGregor and Floyd Mayweather fight again for a big bag of money that people seem to want to endlessly throw at these ridiculous non-events. What do I make of flares at football? Well, depends if Jim White's wearing them. What do I make of it? I make of it that it's a rule that says you can't bring them to football stadiums. And if that's the rule, do as you're bloody told. With due respect, I get the dynamics of atmosphere. I get the dynamics of creating a feeling of people being excited and exhilarated. I don't quite know why that needs to involve flares. I'm sure there is an element of safety and jeopardy involved with anything that's slightly combustible, but I'm also not wanting to be in a situation where I deny people the right to celebrate and enjoy themselves. I didn't see any flares at the Women's European Championships final, in which one of the greatest moments in British sport was completed yesterday. So I don't know why we have to have this in men's football. I don't know why people can't do as they're asked. You know, I understand that, you know, I don't want to be the behaviour police or be a curmudgeon or whatever people call you, a dinosaur, because you don't agree with their point of view. If you don't agree with someone's point of view, you're a dinosaur. I just think football fans have to understand there is a request upon them to behave in a certain way. If the football stadia that you're a guest in, that you pay to be there and you're a fan, and of course it's your football club, requests of you that you don't bring flares inside the stadium, then that's what you have to not do. Does it enhance the game? Does it increase the atmosphere? I'm not sure it does. The fans that bring it obviously think that it does. But with the best will in the world, I also think that there is an obligation upon people to behave in a way that others that control the game, the players, the managers, the owners, the authorities think is becoming. And the battle that's going on seemingly about how fans can behave inside football stadiums, certain fans, seems to be lost on those that think they can do as they want. If there's no safety risks and there is no challenge to this, then there is an argument which says, what does it matter? But there is also evidence that there is. But there is also a basic principle. If we can't all do what we want, I'd like to do what I want. I'd like to do precisely what I want, say what I want, be involved in whatever I choose to be involved in, and say exactly what I think about every single thing in the world. But you can't, because if you do, then you tend to affect other people. You tend to breach the obligations or responsibilities or code of conduct that environments like football stadiums have to provide. So my view is, with the greatest will in the world and without wanting to be a miserable sod, if you're told not to bring flares to a football stadium, don't bring them. And if you do, expect to be thrown out. Right, that's it for this week's edition of One-to-One with Simon Jordan. Now don't forget to let me know your views on Eddie Howe for England manager, Arsenal, and of course that dreadful spectacle, Conor McGregor and Floyd Mayweather 2. Keep liking and subscribing. Of course, keep leaving your questions in the comment section below, and I shall look forward to seeing you next week.